Hello, I'm the Grove Street Lodger, and welcome to the seaside again. All my books are still in boxes. I've been reading mostly off my Kindle, and I've been reading lots of small things. So there's a lot of titles today, but most of the things won't take very long to talk about. It's not a very sunny day today, but as you might be able to tell from the red tinge in my hairline, it has been sunny. Yesterday I was sat on the salt flats by the sea, watching a display by the Red Arrows. It was very good. Somehow, I don't know how, I managed to miss two books off. And I was uploading it when I noticed it. And when I missed one, I thought, well, I tend to leave my mistakes in, I'll just keep that. But then when it was two, it was like, oh, that's just annoying now. So, I'm going to add these two. They're both part of the anonymous works. Anyway, the first thing I was reading was Hudibras by Samuel Butler. Now, Hudibras is quite interesting. It's a take on Don Quixote, essentially. It was written in the 1660s when King Charles II had been invited back onto the throne, but it's set at the end of the Commonwealth era, the era run by Parliament. And Hudibras is a parliamentary colonel who fought in the civil wars, and he has a squire called Ralph. And yeah, so he's like Don Quixote, and Ralph is like Sancho Panza, essentially. And it's all told in rhyme, in hexameter rhyming couplets, which has a good fun rhythm, but over the length of it gets a little bit boring sometimes, a little bit repetitive, and then it will do something, it will switch it up, a silly rhyme or something. Anyway, the story essentially starts with Hudibras and Ralph stopping some bear baiting. And rather than being, oh, good for them stopping bear baiting, the position is more along the lines of what annoying busybodies. And they manage to beat up the people trying to bear bait. The bear gets free and runs away, and they lock up a fiddler who really had nothing to do with it, but was kind of left behind. But then the bear, now recaptured, the crowd come and get Hudibras and Ralph and lock them in the pillory. And a rich widow offers to get him out the pillory. He says, thank you very much. And he realizes that she's a rich widow and decides, I'm going to court her. But she has a little quirk. She only loves people who don't love her. So the more he tries to say you're brilliant, the more she's against him, which is good fun. And it kind of makes sense as well. She's like, she has all these speeches where she's essentially saying, people say crap, to win my money. And I'm actually going to trust somebody who doesn't tell me all these nice things. And so Hudibras then goes to an astrologer to try and get some tips, realizes the astrologer is a faker and there's a fight there, and all these things happen. And in the end, Hudibras sets his claim to the widow, and the widow slaps him down, and that's the end of it. And it's got a weirdly feminist element to it, partly because of the way the widow talks about how women have to hide their true intelligence and their true selves and their true interests, to be just simply love interests, and also how she just wins over Hudibras. She's just he's an idiot, and she's the victor, and it's a very interesting book because it takes these Don Quixote ideas, and it takes the notion of sort of chaos at the end, once Oliver Cromwell has died, but King Charles II hasn't come in, this sort of period of chaos, and what position does a parliamentary colonel have in this new age? And yeah, it can be quite funny. One of my favourite things about it is actually Samuel Pepys's journey through Hudibras, because he bought it when it came out. Said, everyone says it's really funny. I don't get it, and it keeps trying to get it, and in the end, he just concludes, "Nah, it's just not for me." I feel like an idiot because everyone says it's great, and I feel like one of those people who contradictory people who say it's rubbish, but I really just don't get it. So I like that. I did get it, I think, but it's a satire that refers to lots of very detailed elements. Yeah, it'd be like someone writing a satire about the last parliament. You'd have to know all the history of the last parliament and all the ins and outs and the characters and the jokes said about them in order to get the most out of it. And although I knew some bits about that period, I didn't know as much as someone living through it, and so I didn't quite get all the jokes. But it was good. It was pretty good. And the Hudibrastic rhyming hexameters is something quite a few 18th century writers went into and tried to make funny things out of. The next thing I read was called Mostly Hero by Anna Burns, and it's about it's about a superhero, and the superhero's lover, who's called Femme Fatale, he's called superhero, she's called Femme Fatale, has been bewitched into trying to kill him all the time, but she doesn't know that. And essentially these people they don't have names, and they're trapped within the genre of a superhero story. And it's about the ones that learn to overcome that and become more, and the ones that stay trapped in their genre. So there's an old woman who's a secret supervillain, and she's just trapped in her genre, so she doesn't learn or grow, and she dies. But the superhero, and the femme fatale, they learn to be more than their place in their genre. It's a very short little novella. It's quite good fun. Anna Burns wrote Milkman, which I haven't read, which also doesn't have names. So there seems to be a thing for her. I don't know how it works so much in Milkman, but in this, it really just established that whole notion that, they're trapped in a superhero story and they can't get out of it, which I found really interesting. And it was quite a good parody of superhero stuff, which I have quite an ambivalent relationship to be honest. The stuff I prefer that's superhero-y is the more questioning stuff, or the stuff that just allows weird stuff to happen because they're in a superhero universe. The thing I read after that was another little novella. It was called The Little Snake by A.L. Kennedy, and it's about a small girl in an unnamed city, who meets a little golden snake. And actually this little golden snake is the same one from The Little Prince, and he represents natural death. If you are lucky enough to die at your given time, it's the little snake that comes and bites you and lets you go. And so they become friends, and this causes feelings and humanizes this figure of death in the snake. But you also get bits where the snake goes off and does his death dealing. And every time he comes back to the little girl, the city is more and more decrepit, and things are going worse. So when the city starts, it's clearly a very divided city. There are the huge tower blocks, grand estates of the rich, and then, as she called, the squashed-in people where she is. By the time the snake comes back in the last one, the rich have vacated. The squashed-in people are living off, things they can scrabble. And the snake essentially says to her, go this way, someone will take you in. And so it becomes almost like a refugee story as well. And it was really good. It teeters on sort of kitsch, or not kitsch, naff, twee. It teeters on that, the whimsical elements of it, but it never quite falls in. So it walks this tightrope of being like a fairy tale for adults. I enjoyed it very much. Now, the next book I picked because I like the title. It's called Cultus, Arborum, a descriptive account of Phallic tree worship, and it's probably by a man called Hargrave, Jennings, who wrote a whole series of books about phallic cults. A bit of a disappointment there wasn't much phalluses in it. I wanted people worshipping big dick trees. That's what I was after. But the only real link is that, trees are sort of tall and phallic-ish, and so if people worship trees, there might be a sort of link to phallic worship, and that was it. It was more of a commonplace book of different stories, legends, bits of Roman writers, bits of Hindus worship, bits of Buddhist tradition, bits of Celtic tradition, and Norse, like the Yggdrasil, the world ash tree. Sorry, I'm leaning on the table here. And so it was more about how people have worshipped trees. And there was some interesting stories there. There was the king of the Lankas in Sri Lanka, I reckon, who had a branch of the Buddha's Bodhi tree that he worshipped, and he toured around his country, and it was all about all the reverence paid to this branch, and that was interesting. There was a lot of stuff in Germany about passing children or withered limbs and things through the holes in ash trees, and the fairies in the trees are supposed to make you better. Or if you've got arthritis, there was one where you have to climb up a tree and kiss the trunk at the top. I'm like, if your arthritis is that bad, you're not climbing up a tree. I almost think this would have worked better as almost like Metamorphosis, the poem. If this had been a rhyming travel through the different tree worships through times and cultures and ages, that would have been a bit better. This was just kind of like a random grab bag, and so I enjoyed some of the stories in it. I like the tree of 1,000 images, in which the leaves seem to be growing veins in the shape of writings. That's cool. Whether it's true, I don't think it was, but it's a cool story. But it didn't really tie anything together into a coherent story, a coherent narrative, or a coherent theory. It was just, here's a bunch of people worshipping trees. Also, you could take them as phalluses, which I didn't. Now, the next bunch of stuff was all written anonymously. I downloaded a whole bunch off Project Gutenberg about anonymous texts, so that's where that comes from. There is the Council of Dogs. Now, this is a poem. It's part of there's a whole series of these poems. The first one was the Butterflies Ball and the Grasshoppers something, party? Butterflies Ball is the general name. It was a big hit in the Regency period, and it's all about insects getting ready for a ball. And other writers wrote other versions with all these different animals doing these things. And so the Council of Dogs is about a group of dogs who meet up together to go, well, why aren't we getting our poetic justice? Because we're dogs. We're man's best friend. We are good boys and girls. And we're just not getting the same praise and the same attention as all the other animals. This is unfair. And so they all argue over which dog deserves to get the most attention. And so the spaniel was all snooty and says, well, I've hung out with royalty. And then you got the turnspit dog going, I did a terrible job. I had to run around on a turnspit. And they're going, well, no one does that anymore. The Westie yaps forward and says, haha, I can hunt mice and rats. And one of the other dogs goes, yeah, well, so can my mistress's cat. And he's like, oh, you call me a cat? He's like, yeah, I'll call you a cat. And it gets a bit rowdy. The English sheepdog is sort of the chair of this council. And at the end, they decide to all go together to Apollo to appeal to have a better representation in poetry. And yeah, it's good fun. I mean, all the different characterizations of all the dogs, and there are good pictures with it. In fact, the engravings are a lot better than they need to be, really. So it's a good little book. So here we go, anonymous works. We'll try and rattle these off pretty quick. The Travels and Extraordinary Adventures of Bob the Squirrel. This was an 1845 American work, and I thought it would be a fun story about a squirrel called Bob, and it just amused me that the squirrel was called Bob. But it isn't. It's the story of a father telling a story of Bob the Squirrel. And so you get the interjections of his two children, one of which has his arm in a sling and the other which is his little sister. And as it's going on, the children begin to realise the parallels between Bob the Squirrel and the misadventures the little boy has had. And so as it goes on, the daughter is increasingly delighted by the fact that dad is essentially ragging the son, and the son is increasingly annoyed by it. And so it's more about that interaction than the actual adventures of Bob the Squirrel. But as such, it's very fun, it's very lively. I really love the idea of this dad using this story to just dunk on his son for being an idiot. I enjoyed it a lot. Now the next is a very long title. I need to... The Surprising and Singular Adventures of a Hen as Related by Herself to Her Family of Chickens. Now, this was an English book from 1807, I think, the first sort of Regency era. Anyway, a lot of these are Regency era children's books. And it is a hen talking about her adventures to her chicks, because one of the chicks has had his worm stolen and he wants to have revenge on the chick that stole it. And the hen's going, no, you need to be patient. Listen to all the stuff I've been through. And what defines this book, essentially, is misery and gore. It's horrible. So when our hen was a little chick herself, her parents were savaged by a dog. She was taken in by a little girl who pampered her and raised her. But then when she became a full-grown chicken, she couldn't stay in the house, so she was kicked out. And all the other chickens don't like her because she's snooty and she doesn't know how to fend for herself. And then there's this really terrifying scene when she's in the chicken house and a fox gets in and she describes the slaughter of all these other chickens and how she runs away. And then a boy picks her up and decides to make what's called a cockshy of her. Now, this was usually done to cockerels, but they were essentially tied to a post and sticks thrown at them until they died. This was an entertainment. She manages to slip out of that, and a nice boy looks after her, takes her home. But the servants don't realise which is his favourite chicken and which is the other chicken, so she gets captured when he's at school and is fattened up, and she describes being in this little cage with nothing to do but eating and feeling physically uncomfortable, and how she just longs for death. She wants the murderer's blade to come and kill her, but then she gets released when the boy comes back before she's killed, and then she lives there was another couple of bits I completely forgot, where this sort of prankster plucks all her feathers out in a copy of Diogenes. This is a man, and so it's the grim description of her, being alive and being plucked, and all the blood and the matted feathers and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, the depiction of a chicken's life in the Regency, the long 18th century, if you like, is gore and misery. Though, as I concluded in my little write-up review, I don't think the life of a chicken now is particularly great. So the next was a similar kind of thing, another Regency children's book called The History of a Tame Robin. And this is about Robin who is taken from his nest and raised, and he gains not a robin song, he actually learns some songs from a pianoforte. And because of this, he's quite valued. So he gets passed from owner to owner and sold and moved about. And his experiences are not quite as grim as the chickens. And it's fun because it's an 18th century Bildungsroman in miniature. So it's a very little elegant thing about this robin going through different owners and discovering different kinds of life. He lives with a poor family and a rich family and at a school, at this, at that. So yeah, it's not bad. Tale of a Robin. History of a Tame Robin. The next thing was a short poem called The Monkey's Frolic. This is a poem about a monkey who tries to shave a cat. A cat runs up, he grabs the cat, climbs up the roof, fends off people like King Kong up the roof, falls down a chimney, scares a man with gout, who leaps out of bed and runs down the stairs, and the doctor remarks wryly, "Oh look, a fear can cure gout. Well, all my medicines couldn't." The most notable thing about this are the pictures. I'm particularly fond of this one. There you go. So that's Monkey's Frolic. Next thing's called Jack, Jingle and Sucky, Shingle. It's another poem for children. Jack Jingle is a naughty boy who gets whipped for being lazy, and Sucky Shingle is sulky. And is this supposed to be sulky? But no, it's definitely Sucky on the cover, and she's called Suki. So she's sulky, Sucky, Shingle, Suki, yeah, and she gets whipped for doing something wrong. And it's about these two naughty children who are corrected by being smacked, and they come together and decide to marry. And essentially, the end of it's all about them bartering. And Suki Shingle, she's got £100, and Jack's got some cows and things. And in the end, he says, "Look, what I've really got is dedication and love, and I'm not going to leave you." And so they marry. So it's got a happy ending, I suppose. The next is Jack and Gill and Old Dame Gill. Or, yeah, Gill, but spelled with a G. It's a continuation of Jack and Gill. So we know Jack and Gill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Gill came tumbling after. What then happens is, alternately, Jack and Gill hurt themselves and the other one laughs at them. And then they start trying to hurt each other. And then Dame Gill comes in to stop it, and a wild bull bashes her in the bum. And that's it. And it has some pretty fun little pictures. My absolute favourite thing is this, because the publisher was called Mr. Aldis. And so this has come to Aldi's for the books. And Aldi's is a supermarket chain. That's fun. The next was called The Wig and the Shoulder of Mutton, or the Folly of Juvenile Fears. And I thought this was going to be another sort of tale about these objects, like the wig and the shoulder of mutton would tell their stories. But no, it's these kids are frightened into thinking a wig is a ghost and then the shoulder of mutton is a ghost. And the dad, says to them, "You've got to be more careful about what you're scared of. Let me tell you another story." So he tells the story of two brothers, one of which decides to spook the other and has skills in stilt walking. So he dresses as a ghost and sits on his stilts. And when he scares his other brother, he scares him so much he is now, what did they say, a deaf, dumb imbecile. He basically robs his brother of all his senses, and then rocks and wishes he hadn't done it. And everybody's sad. So it's saying don't play tricks on each other. Yeah, bit of a weird one. Next was The Adventures of a Black Coat. And this is not a children's story. It's an adult book from 1706, I think. It's very much a Grub Street production, much earlier than some of the 1806 stuff from earlier. And it's the story of a black coat called Sable, who tells about his life to a white coat. After the white coat says, "You're really shabby," and the black coat essentially goes, "Yeah, of course I am. You should see the things I've been through." And so he talks about the things he's been through. He was made as a mourning coat for a parliamentarian, so he talks about how corrupt Parliament is, and then he becomes a coat that people can rent out if they want to be a gentleman for a day. And essentially there are two reasons why they want to do this. Well, one reason really, they want to make a good impression, but it's whether they want to make a good impression for good or bad reasons. And so he gets rented out to one man who he's been promised a job in the Spanish embassy 2 years ago by a lord, and the lord's essentially said, "Go away, learn Spanish, brush up on this, come back, and then I'll give you the job." And he goes back to get the job, and the lord's essentially saying, "Whoops, sorry, I've already given it away." And this man's going, "I spent all the money I have learning Spanish." To which the Lord goes, "Well, then you'll be able to read Don Quixote in its natural language. Good on you." But then there are other people. So there's this man who borrows the coat. He goes to a coffee house. He eats and dashes. And as he dashes, he grabs a nicer hat than the one he came in with. But he's caught. And he says, "Oh, I'm so short-sighted. I'm so sorry. It was an accident." And then he goes to another coffee house, does it again, and is not caught. And then he takes a carriage. He takes it towards Covent Garden and says, "Oh, I just need to check something with this shop." So he gets out the carriage, goes into the shop because he knows the shop has a back door that goes onto another road. And so he dines and dashes again with the carriage. Bumpy. He tricks a man out of a watch, and another man out of a chain, and another man out of a thing called a rocolo. I have no idea what that is. And yeah, he's essentially a thief and a con artist, and he's quite fun. Another time he's hired out by a prankster, and their circle of friends always have a meal in Putney, and there's this big fat friend who always talks about how he can eat the most. And so he gives the fat friend laxative-laden ginger nuts, and so they're all sitting down to eat. The fat friend has to keep running off as it says a thunderous rumble of the guts, and everyone's sort of laughing because they know what's really going on. And I don't know whether this is supposed to be the prank backfiring or the apotheosis of the prank, but the fat man vomits all over the table and shits himself. So I don't know. Eventually, inevitably, this being a Grub Street production, the coat is owned by a penniless poet, Mr. Stanza, one of the only people given a name, who is immediately thrown into Fleet Prison, and that explains the rough state of the black coat. And it's a really fun book. It's very funny. I loved the details of how the conman, for example, worked, or the coat would go to someone new, and you think, okay, what's this little story going to be? It was good fun. It's a very early example of something called an it narrative, where the object talks, and is not written for children. No. The next was written for children, and it's again an 18 sort of Regency period book. It's called Youthful, Folly Detected, written for the benefit of youth, particularly for females. And he says he wrote it for some friends of his, or the daughters of some friends of his, and they all said it was so good it should be published, so he published it. And in some ways it's kind of just good advice for young women, and in some ways it's a tool of screwing young women into their place. Get in their place. Don't be too happy, don't be too smiling, don't come on to people, don't be too kind to people because they'll think you're coming on to them, don't laugh too much, don't do this, don't do that. I think he thinks the intention is good. I think he thinks he's helping people get on with life. I think he is telling women their place. But yeah, and it was boring. It was it wasn't the most boring, actually, because next most boring was another anonymous work from the 1810s, the early Regency again. The Child's Curiosity book, which I thought sounded great because I love curiosity. And it's one, the pictures are terrible. And two, it's essentially, I think it's trying to be like the Little Pretty pocketbook, which was already 50 years old by this date. But I think it's trying to be like that, where it has the picture of something the kid will know and a description of it and a little moral at the end. But the Little Pretty pocketbook has charm. Well, this is just dull. So it'd be a picture of a nursery, and it will say, "Oh, look, this is the nursery. This is where the baby lies. You know the baby. You need to look after the baby." Or these are some people playing marbles. Marbles is a good game. You don't bet on marbles. Marbles is good fun. Don't be betting. And it does that, and it's very, very dull. And the last one is a picture of Clown and Harlequinade. Clown being Grimaldi, actually, or very much like Grimaldi. And it said, if you're a good little boy or girl, you will get to meet these fellows in the theatre. But if you're not, you won't get to. Anyway, I hope this pretty little plaything of a book has entertained you. I'm like, no, it really hasn't. I read tons of these children's books, old children's books this month, and they were all entertaining in some way. Even the advice book was a bit entertaining, but the Child's Curiosity book, not at all. I also forgot to mention The Hermit in the Woods. Now, this is a story about a man. He suffers a tragedy. His children and farm all die in a raid by Scots. So I'm guessing this is set in the medieval period. I'm not sure. It's written again in the Regency period. He runs off to the forest. He becomes a hermit, and one day he finds two babies left on his doorstep. And so he cares for the babies, and then there's a hunt going through the wood, and it just so happens that one of the hunters is the baby's dad, and they're all reunited, and he says, come back, hermit. You've done a great thing. Come live with us. You don't have to live in the woods anymore. So the hermit goes back and he shaves his beard, and wow, I really do look red in this light, don't I? Whew, I'm shiny. Shaves his beard, but so he can't stay there. He's still depressed and wants to be by himself. And so as he's on his way back, he visits his old farm and notices, oh, it's a farm again. And two women come out, and they're his daughters. And it turns out if he just hung around for half an hour, he'd have realised that his daughters hadn't have died, and they could have rebuilt the farm together, and that's the end. What's significant about it, actually, is the illustrations, because every now and again, well, every page actually is an illustration, and the text at the bottom of the page says, and so the man was working very hard with his axe, just like the next picture. You turn the page, and there's the picture of the man with the axe. And these pictures were by Berwick, who... if I'm pronouncing his name right. He was the guy who did the British Book of Birds. I read a biography of him and never quite got his name right. It's not his best work. His weirdly, his people were less lively than his birds, even though his birds were modelled on dead birds. But yeah, so that as well. From now on, it's the ones I remember to include. The next is another thing that I thought was a children's book, but is actually an early 18th century Grub Street production for adults. It's called The Comical Pilgrim, or A Cynic Philosopher. He says he's a happy-go-lucky pilgrim who travels the world. He's travelled Africa and America and Europe, but he only wants to talk about the UK and Holland. And he's not comical at all. He's vitriolic and vicious. So it starts off in London, and he talks about how everyone's drunk and stupid, and he goes on about Beau, who were kind of like, I suppose, hipsters. They were the cool, fashionable, wig-wearing, snuff-taking. They spoke in their own special way, and he goes on and on and on about these Beau, how they're terrible, and how he said they're effeminate and speak like mollies. He hates the theatre, completely hates the theatre. At one point he goes through plays almost like cinema sins. He just dings really small errors in plays as if it's this big thing. And then he goes around the country and finds every part of the country's crap. So Sussex is full of bumpkins. Wales is weird and insular and alien. Ireland's full of poor Irish people. Scotland smells because everyone eats oats and that makes them smell. Holland is full of women who have more forehead than face. Getting there. And so, yeah, it's I couldn't work out whether it was just a genuinely hateful kind of diatribe or whether it was the joke was that it was hateful. You know, you get those people who play angry as the comedy, and maybe that was what was going on. But because I'm so removed from that playing of angry and from 300 odd years ago, maybe even 400 now, um, the the playing angry doesn't work. It just seems like anger and not very edifying anger at that, and not very funny anger. So that was that. And the last thing I finished, I'm now back on some Proust, but the last thing I finished this month, which I read sitting again on the salt flats by the sea, is one of my favourite spots. It's called Anecdotes of the Learned Pig, and it came out round about the time of a learned pig called Toby, who taught all these tricks and was a big thing. So I was reading it thinking, oh, cool. A history of this pig. And it said it was written by James Boswell and Hester Thrale Piozzi. And I thought, Bossie and Piozzi, one collaborating, especially at this time, which was 1807, I think, when they were rivals to be writing about Johnson's life. And two, writing about a pig. This is weird. So I read it, and it wasn't about Toby. It was clearly a satirical thing about someone, and this pig. His mother ate Sacrival's sermons, and from then on grunted longer and louder. And the pig was whipped for eating Milton's flowers, and so he hated Milton. The pig was sick and touched for the king's evil. And then I got to the footnotes of that chapter, or the endnotes of that chapter, and it was clips. It was excerpts from Piozzi's Anecdotes of Johnson and James Boswell's tour of Scotland with Johnson. But it was as if the clips, the extracts, weren't talking about Johnson, they were talking about the pig. And I'm going to think, hang on, is the learned pig Samuel Johnson? And I thought, well, Sacrival, there's an anecdote about the 3-year-old Samuel Johnson being taken to see Sacrival. There's Johnson's dislike of Milton, King's evil. Oh, it is. The learned pig is Johnson. And so it's a satirical biography of Johnson as a pig. So his dictionary is described as the pig rootling around all the rubbish and the nuts and the roots, eating them and then shitting out a rich manure. And so the dictionary is a rich manure. And I mean, when it said the pig went idling and adventuring, it was like, oh, it definitely is Johnson. As it went on, it became clearer and clearer. This pig was Johnson. And it's, his sonorous grunt, the fact that everything the pig said was written down, the fact that Hester Thrale became the priestess of the pig. It said the pig went on a journey around Scotland dressed as a bear with a monkey on his back. It's like, well, that monkey's Boswell. And then, it's really quite unpleasant about Johnson. It said that the pig realised that if he had been born earlier, he would have been one of Pope's dunces in the Dunciad. And then at the very end, it said, yeah, but given all that, the pig was decent and we're much poorer without it. So, oh, okay. So you don't hate Johnson that much then. But yeah, I didn't even know there was a sustained satire against Johnson from just after he died. Let alone that he was characterised as a pig. I love that. So that was all I read. As I said, lots of stuff, but most of it quite small. And I've started with back on Proust. I've got a couple of paper, physical books that I may have acquired since I've got here. None of them too expensive, but I shouldn't really acquire them considering how long it took me to bring the other ones up, but I can't help myself. So I think there'll be more paper books next month. And that's me done. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.